The Premier League season is officially over, and as always, we saw some final day drama in the battle for the Champions League race. It was, in the end, Man City, Chelsea, and Newcastle who secured their spots, but as always, we are left talking about VAR and the controversy. But today, we are going to reflect on another epic Premier League season. We're going to go through every single team and give our honest grades of how they have done this season. As always, make sure you're along for the journey with us in the comments. Let us know your thoughts if we're right or wrong. And obviously, for your own clubs, let us know. And make sure you like and subscribe while you're there as well. Let's get straight kicked off. We're going to we'll go in alphabetical order, keep it nice and simple. And we've randomly allocated teams across all three of us. Of course, all three of us covering our own clubs as well. So let's get kicked off. Bournemouth. I've got Bournemouth. So for me, this was not an obvious one. I think I struggled between a kind of A and B. In the end, I went for B. My logic was that I think we've got to remember they have got some phenomenal results this season. We've also got to remember they lost Solanke in the summer, which was a massive, massive deal for them. I think they've done extremely well to obviously replace him with Evan Nilsson. You've got other key players who have stepped up, but despite having a good season, they still did finish ninth. And I think for them, getting it to an A would have been getting into Europe. But I think Iriola deserves a lot of credit. Obviously, they're losing Housen in the summer as well. So it'll be interesting to see what's next for Bournemouth. But I think overall, they'll be fairly content with the season they've put up.
I think it's hard to argue that. To be fair, I think a B is a fair result. If they got into Europe, I think it would have definitely been an A. But just because they haven't, I think they've had a great season. But yeah, B's fine with me.
Cool. Let's move straight on. Reese, we'll come to you for Arsenal, resident Arsenal fan. How would you assess this season?
Has to be a D. Again, failure. Easiest chance to win the league. Didn't do it. Dropped, what was it, 21 points from leading positions and had a poor performance in the cups. You could say, oh, Champions League semi-final. Doesn't matter. You only remember who wins it. So yeah, failure. It wasn't a good season, whether people want to admit that or not. It wasn't.
I'd still say it's a little bit harsh. I think if I had Arsenal, I probably would have put you B just so you can consistently be second. But no, look, I think I get your point and I get your frustration. The positive spin I'd probably put on Arsenal is that you weren't involved in the drama that was yesterday with sweating for a Champions League spot. You secured that before the final day of the season. You can argue progress in the Champions League. I know, as you said, you got to win it really to care, but I think beating Real Madrid is still showing signs of something.
Well, it's not the Real
Um,
Madrid team of last season, so no. Just like it
yeah,
wasn't the same German team that England beat in the Euros, but everyone overreacted to it. So no, it's not been a good season, and now all the pressure is on for the summer when this could have been avoided.
I think obviously I know Reese is harsher on Arsenal than I'd say me and Jordan and some other Arsenal fans. I probably would have put them in a sort of C because once again no trophy. That's what Arsenal should be aiming for. They weren't in a title race for it, so it's kind of and they're expected to be because they have been for the past few seasons actually in a title race. I know Reese has said they're not going to win it, but they were still involved. They were still close enough on points, and this time they ended what 10 points behind Liverpool,
yeah.
but they were never really that close to them. Liverpool were winning it, and then they could drop points at a canter because they were celebrating winning the league. So Reese has gone for a D. I probably would have pushed for a C, but it's on Reese.
Cool. Let's move on. Jamie, over to you for Villa. Before we even start, we've got to talk about yesterday. I mean, absolutely ridiculous decision. Um, uh, Villa
The,
fans must be absolutely livid.
they have to be livid, but I think they do need to remember that they sort of had the ball over the line, goal line technology. Sometimes it goes for you, sometimes it goes against you. Look, the decision was completely wrong. They've complained about the experience of the ref. I think a lot of refs may have actually given it because it does look like he is kicking the ball out of his hand. You,
Mm.
but yeah, it's ultimately it's the wrong decision, and it could have cost Villa. Champions League football. As you said, they didn't get it, and I think they only needed a point to go above Newcastle, who lost. So very annoying for them. In terms of their season, it was a difficult one. I've actually gone for them to be in B because they were in Champions League football. And normally you've seen it sort of Newcastle of late. When you get Champions League football, your next season you drop off quite a bit. And considering they were, 1 point off getting Champions League football again, they performed very well, I thought, in the Champions League, considering it was their first time back for a while. And they've got Europa. It's not like they've completely got out of Europe. And to be honest, Villa fans should be licking their lips at Europa, seeing that, 16th, 17th place this season got to the final. Why can't Villa go and win it? So I think there should be a little bit of a positive. I understand the disappointment from them due to that decision yesterday. I think overall they've had a decent season, and one where they can sort of see, yeah, there's progress still. We can kick on and get Champions League football next season and win Europa, or one or the other gets you Champions League football in that sort of aspect.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. They had a little cup run as well, obviously a trip to Wembley. So I think when they look back and they're honestly reflecting, I think they'll take it. Europa, they'll be amongst the favourites to win Europa. So when that frustration dies down, I think they'll have a really good go at the Europa League. So I don't think it's all bad.
With Emery as well. Emery's won it a few times, so I do think it's probably a good one. Moving on next is Brentford and me again. This one I struggled with. I want a gap between B and C, to be honest, and that's exactly where I put them. I've kind of thought of a C plus or a B minus for Brentford, but I had a bit of a look at what my prediction was, and I thought Brentford might go down. So the fact is they've got 10th. They were 16th last season. I've put them at a B. I think they've been quite entertaining. Embuemo, Wissa, 20 goals, 19 goals, respectively. They've been a good team, and no one's really wanted to go and play them. They've always sort of turned up. They they're not expected to get these sort of Europa League, Champions League kind of places. And I think 10th's a great season for them, considering they were 16th. And like I said, I had them to go down. So to go from that to 10th, and also I think be entertaining, is a credit to them. So I've put them there. I think you could argue C definitely, but B minus is kind of where I was going with on this.
Yeah, I think you've got to look at context again. Again, they lost Tony, huge player for them, so many goals. They're not a club who's expected to get Europe. We've got to remember that. Like what Frank's doing, he's established a consistent base for Brentford in the Prem. Like we've got to remember who Brentford are and where they've been. Like they are in another world a team who are flip flopping between Championship and Prem. So I still think I think B's probably fair, but Wissa stepping up and Bremo stepping up to basically fill the void of Tony, I think is brilliant. So I think a lot of Brentford fans, although it's only 10th, will be really happy with this season. I think some would even say an A. Reese, any thoughts on Brentford before we come to you for Brighton?
No, I think that's fair. Consistent in top 10, halfway there. So, yeah, I think they'd have taken it. I think there were moments they could have pushed up a little bit further and then they pulled themselves back a little bit. So, yeah, I'd say B.
Cool. All right, we're back to you for Brighton, Reese.
This is a hard one actually, because I actually expected Brighton to struggle a little bit. I wasn't expecting much of them, but they only lost 9 games and only ended up finishing, what was it, 5 points outside the top five. I, I mean, getting thrashed by Nottingham Forest 7-0 was so poor, but they bounced back from that. They beat some good teams along the way. They didn't lose to Arsenal. They drew away to Villa. They knocked Newcastle out the cup quite impressively. Yes, they lost to Palace twice, but for what they achieved, I'm actually going to put them as A because I think they achieved better than what I thought they were going to do. I thought they were going to have a terrible season, but they held up well, and players like João Pedro and Matoma, I think, were much better this season. So even if the stats may or may not show it, it's up to you. But I'm going to give them an A because I think they surprised me but they were very consistent, and I think they were just a couple of results away from actually being in the top five.
I don't know. I think for Brighton, I know again you've got the element of losing players and what have you, but I think for an A, they've got to get Europe. I think I'd put them in a B because this is a club now. I know they've got a new manager and etc. etc. You can make that argument, but this is a club now who should be getting at least Europa League. They've shown they can beat the big sides on their day, and they're 4 points off Forest at the end of the day. So for me, I'd probably say B, but I think for an A, they've got to get into the Conference League or something like that.
Yeah, I'd probably agree with Jordan on a B or a C, to be honest. Like, to put them in an A, and like Rishi said, they got beat 7-0 in this season. It wasn't, I don't know, it's.
But don't forget, Nottingham Forest got whacked five, and I'm pretty sure you're going
Yes,
to rate
yeah.
them quite high.
No, that's still a fair point on it, but it's. Yeah, I don't know, because they technically didn't actually, they've not actually achieved anything in this season. They've just. Where'd they come? Did they come eighth in the end?
Yeah,
Yeah.
eighth place, so no
Eighth place.
Europe.
So they're one off the sort of European places. So it's still a good season for them. It's not that they've had a terrible season. Don't get me wrong, but you've gone with an A. So
Yeah, they finished higher than Bournemouth and Brentford as well, so
yeah, they did.
I can't knock that.
Cool. All right, let's move on to one of our own clubs, Chelsea. Um, so I thought about this because there's kind of two arguments you can look at. You can say, oh well, who Chelsea are, you can't celebrate fourth place, but I do think there is a lot of context to be considered in finishing fourth. So obviously we know we've spent a lot of money that gets referenced consistently, £1 billion this, £1 billion that. I mean, if you actually look at our squad value, it's nowhere near a billion. Like if you look at our starting 11 yesterday, it was 400 mil, 430 mil to be precise. And with our bench, it's around 650. So this whole narrative of oh £1 billion squad, I think is a little bit, everyone's looking at the gross spend, but if you do that with every club, it's going to be around those kind of numbers. But I think when you look at the start of the season, I think in all of our predictions, we said Chelsea could finish anywhere. We could have finished top three. We could have finished 10th. And for me, when you look and go, we've got a new manager who is not proven at this level. We've got the youngest squad in the Premier League by an absolute country mile. We actually set a record for the youngest squad, average age of starting 11s in a Prem season. And we've been written off many times because of that young squad. We were getting mocked at the start of the season for having too many players. So I think for Maresca to deal with that, to navigate the situation, and to actually end up finishing fourth, not fifth, I don't think he could have done much more in this season, if I'm being honest. Um, so I've gone A because, and again, I'll put an asterisk on it, saying that includes us winning the Conference League. I think if we don't win that, we've got to be downgraded. But at the end of the day, the start of the season, everyone said if we get back in the Champions League and we win a trophy, that is a good season for a first season of a manager. So some might disagree with that. And if we keep doing that every year, I'm not going to always say it's an A because we've got to make progress. But I think it's a great season at the minute.
Maresca was appointed to do exactly what he was, has done exactly what he was appointed to do, and that was get you over the line. Yeah, he got you in it, and he got those results when it mattered. So I can see why you put an A, and I think a trophy will solidify that. Bearing in mind that the worries around December, January, Feb. I'm inclined to give it an A. Actually, I would have probably originally put B, but yeah, I think A if he seals the Conference League.
Okay, I'm going to disagree with you both here. I think an A for a club like Chelsea. I understand where you're coming from, Jordan, and your points. For a club like Chelsea, just coming fourth isn't an A season. It to me, I think A is way too high. I would have probably said a B is fair, and to be honest, it probably would have been a C if you don't win the Conference League. I,
But
I,
what are you expecting realistically? A
but
new
no,
manager
but that's
with the
it. That's
youngest
what
squad ever.
I would say. An A is going above expectations. I don't think you've gone above expectations. I think you've probably gone around expectations. I think I looked at my league predictions. I think I had you fifth. So the fact that you got fourth is, slightly above it. But even then, it was so close up there. You could have easily finished seventh. You could have finished third. It was sort of tight season around them places. So I think an A is extremely generous because you've not won a trophy yet. If you do win the trophy, I'm going to be honest. I'm still going to say the sort of same things. You should be winning that tournament. Your The stat that came out. I know you've said about who's your squad value, but your overall squad value at the start of the season was 100. I think it was 100. Was it something like 100 million more than every other team combined? So if you don't win that, that's where I feel like it's an embarrassment and should go down to a C. But I think you will win it. Don't get me wrong. A trophy's still good enough, so that's why I don't think it should be a C without a trophy. I think a B would have been fair, but like I said, you've picked an A. Reese has kind of agreed with you, so I just think it's a bit generous because you've got to remember who Chelsea are. It
Yeah,
like
I agree with that. I'm not if we're fourth for the next 5 seasons, I'm not going to go every year. Oh, it's an A season. Like we've got to make progress. But this season, you got to remember the chaos. People have forgotten about it. We were getting mocked. Like we really genuinely could have had a Man United or Spurs season where we
Yeah,
finished bottom half.
but you were also you like, it was sort of half mentioned of you were possibly in the title race in December. You
Yeah,
were
that,
saying
that
you
was a
had
bit of a
confidence.
meme.
Yes, yes. Oh, like I think we all sort of said we don't actually think you're in the title race, but you were there, and then have come sort of well, you come fourth, which is good enough for normal Champions League places, let alone with the extra place. But yeah, let's move on to Crystal Palace. Who has that?
Yeah, that's me. Has to be an A. Um, I'd even chuck in an A plus. I know we've not got it on here. 12th place. We know we've always said everyone refers to Palace as that perfect mid-table club. But winning the FA Cup, when you when you win the club's first ever major trophy, even if you get relegated, it's an A season. I know that's maybe a bit harsh, maybe a bit ridiculous. Sorry, but yeah, Palace fans absolutely would have bit your hand off for that season. They weren't even threatened with relegation, so it's not like they've survived. They have been perfectly mid-table most of the season. It was a bit of a rough start. Thankfully, they did stick with Glasner. We were all singing their praises pre-season, but yeah, winning the FA Cup, incredible achievement, and yeah, phenomenal season for them.
I don't think you can argue that. I think we thought they would have probably done better in the league than sort of coming 12th. I think, like you said, we were quite sort of positive around Palace on having a good season. They may have finished with what was a goal difference of zero, but it doesn't matter for what Palace's expectations are. To go and win the FA Cup, it's an A season. Even if they go and do it next year, it's still an A season. And I kind of agree with you on that point, Jordan. If they go and get relegated, it's still an A season, not an A plus. If they get relegated,
Yeah,
it's still an A season kind of thing. So yeah, I totally agree on that.
I think just looking at the points as well, they're only 3 points off Bournemouth and Brentford, and 1 point off Fulham. So league-wise, it wasn't a million miles off. Let's move on to Everton, Reese.
I'm giving Everton a C. Um, Moyes, say they're in no danger of going down. But they weren't good. I think Sean Dyche would realise that the performances weren't great. They were very hit and miss. Moyes stabilised them massively and took them higher and solidified their position. And of course won their last game at Goodison. I would like to have thought that their ambitions would have still been to finish a little higher at the start of the season. Um, but yeah, they're just nothing massively to shout about at the moment. I think they'll be a little disappointed, but also pleased that they ended on a much higher position than where they were. But again, I don't think any of us are too surprised of where they've finished. So they've not put in any performances where we've gone, wow, this is insane. And we've not seen any performance where we've gone, oh, they're in serious danger here going down. So been a steady season for them, and I will expect them to move higher next year or next season.
The thing is, though, on that, like they actually end up 13th. So weirdly, I'd probably have given them a B because obviously based on the second half of the season because they really were struggling. They were looking at potential relegation. Then they were floating around kind of Spurs and Man United. But what Moyes has done, I think, has been incredible because they were essentially in a relegation battle, and he's ended up getting them, what's that, 23 points, if my maths is right, 23 points above 18th place. So I think that's good. I think like what I can't remember our exact predictions to be honest, but I think we had Everton definitely lingering around the relegation spots. So I'd personally probably put them B and say they've overachieved a bit. But Moyes has absolutely saved their season because with
I
Dyche they
think
probably were going to be in there.
I think that's why I probably think a C's fair because it was sort of like it was doing very badly, and then Moyes has done it better. So if you're doing it just based off Moyes, you probably are looking towards your B. But then if you've got to think the time before that, they weren't doing so great, and that was looking more like a D. I think an F is kind of if they got relegated, kind of, or scraped a relegation against these three who have gone down. So I think a C might be fair. But Moyes, under the Moyes part of it, yeah, I would say you're pushing up to a B because he's done very well since coming back.
Yeah. Um, let's move on to Fulham. Jamie, that is you.
So this is another team with a zero goal difference on the final day. Losing to City 2-0 meant they were exactly sort of two sort of goal difference and nothing. I've kind of gone with a C. I think it could be a C plus. It's just a bit of a nothing happened in the end. Sort of like I still think coming 11th. They were 13th last season. It's a slight improvement, but I don't think there's much more to go off. To be perfectly honest.
Yeah, they become a team, didn't they, where you thought, oh, going away to Fulham is not what I want, but they just tailed off towards the end, and that performance in the cup quarter final against Palace, I thought was so poor. As good as Palace were, I thought just when it comes to that moment, Fulham just couldn't get over the line. But I suppose they were a bit of a yo-yo club not long ago, so I think they'll be glad to be where they are for now. It's building on it next season is the big thing, and they've got the resources to do that.
Yeah, for Fulham, I think it's a kind of what if season. We know they've got the ability, they've got a good squad, so I think next season you'd want to see a European push. Um, cool. Ipswich, Jamie, back to you.
This has to be an F. There's no. It's sort of you've gone down. I understand Ipswich were expected to go down, first time in the league for several years, but there was no relegation battle, and that's the only thing I can think that could have pushed them up, really. So it's an F for me. Unfortunately, the three teams that come up were pretty poor, and well, we'll see. But I think they all deserve an F, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, maybe a D because they were expected to go down anyway, and they weren't the bottom club. But if you get them relegated, and not putting much of a fight up, yeah, it's hard to argue to be honest. Um, another relegated side, Reese. Over to you, Leicester.
Has to be an F. Look, I know that all of us pretty much put Leicester to go down at the start of the season. There's a lot of negativity around the club, financial constraints, etc. They've got a huge wage bill. It's like they'd written themselves off by the time they'd even, gone up into the Premier League. You could see a lot of Leicester fans thought, well, why are we bothering? And we didn't really see an investment. I don't think Steve Cooper was given much of a chance, but when you add to that negativity, what else can he do? They appointed Ruud van Nistelrooy. I don't think it's the right fit for him. I think he works well with certain teams and certain styles, and it just got worse. Um, and I think they just couldn't get themselves out of it. And, they finished the best of the bottom three, but 25 points when, was it 20 years ago? West Ham got 42 and still went down. Says it all about how the gap is only getting wider. Um, and Leicester could be, it makes you wonder if Leicester will bounce straight back up. We just don't know, but it was a poor season. I think it's one that everyone wants to forget.
Yeah, agreed. Next team is Liverpool. That's me. It got to be an A. Got to be an A. Obviously, they won the league, right? Um, Great season, comfortable, new manager. No one expected them to win the title, and that's pundits. That's our predictions. I don't think anyone had them first. Yeah, phenomenal season to do that with a new manager. Has to be an A.
Yeah,
Um,
I hadn't
can't
finished.
imagine.
So
Cool.
okay.
Let's go straight on then. Nice and simple. Man City, Jamie.
This was a bit of a tough one, to be honest. It's not been a great season, and a few things could have changed it, to be honest. I've gone with a C. I could easily go D. I can see the argument to be next to Arsenal. We obviously finished 3 points below Arsenal in this terrible season. We won more games than them. We won the second most games in the league. I've gone with a C. Like the FA Cup, we got to an FA Cup final, lost that. If we won that, you could even argue a B, possibly. I wouldn't say an A in any stretch. Champions League, we were quite poor, but we were knocked out by Real Madrid. And I know Reece said it isn't the normal Real Madrid of old, but that kind of covers it a bit because it's Real Madrid in their competition. If we lost to, I don't know, let's say we lost to PSG, I know they've been very good, but that would have looked a lot worse than losing to a Real Madrid just based off the name. Like, it weren't a great season. It's one we're forgetting, and technically we're done with the season. But the Club World Cup means the season's still technically going on. Unfortunately, this season we just wanted to sort of wipe our hands, go right. Where's pre-season? Not another competition. But yeah, I think a C is possibly the fairest. You can argue. I can definitely see a D argument though.
Yeah, yeah. At the end of the day, if you won the FA Cup, I think you could definitely push a B because you've still got Champions League football and a big trophy. But yeah, I think C's fair to be honest. Let's go to the other half of Manchester. Man
Oh
United,
God.
Reece.
I mean, it has to be F.
Do we
I
have
mean,
a
what a
U?
shambolic
Should we just
season.
add a
We
U
we,
for
we, we
If
need
United?
a new scale. We
if
need a
we
new
had
scale for
another
this.
grading system, this would have been a lot worse. Everyone would be in agreement with this. Fans, players, coaches, supporters, owners. It has been an unacceptable season. Look, I thought they'd bounce back, but it was poor. That Europa League final, that performance summed up everything about the issues at the moment. Ten Hag would have got a performance out of that. It's not Amarim's fault completely because his style is different, but this has been poor. The performances have been poor. 18 defeats, minus 10 goal difference with the players they've got. It's not acceptable for Manchester United, and they have to be an F. It can't, I can't say anything else on that.
Yeah, agreed. Absolutely nothing good about their season. Newcastle, that's back to me. Uh, has to be an A. Has to be an A. I'd even argue A plus because although they almost bottled it, I mean that would have been absolutely devastating yesterday, and that's really poor, I must say, losing in a game they needed to win. So that it could have been a disaster for Newcastle, but Champions League football, winning a trophy, every single fan would have taken that. So yeah, A plus for me.
Yeah, Newcastle definitely an A plus. Looking onto Forest, it's a weird one because I think everyone, if you asked me sort of, I don't know, 2 months ago, the easiest A. It was sort of like Liverpool, Forest, they're the two A's easily, but they dropped off and they didn't get the Champions League football. They're playing now Conference League football. So I've kind of gone with a B, but it's like a B plus. I know it could be a bit harsh, but I think the drop off, the coming from what 17th to 7th, is phenomenal, and that's why I've been arguing against the sort of Brighton and Chelsea picks being in A, because I think Forest have achieved more upwards, but there was sort of just the drop off at the end made me feel like it should be a B season because there will be some disappointed Forest fans.
Yeah, I think we should go back to our podcast we did on Forest. Actually, there was a lot of Forest fans getting gassed up and saying they're going to do it all, but I think in the end it can't be an A. I know it sounds crazy, but yes, they've got European football, but they had Champions League locked up. I know everyone expected a tail off, but it was locked up and done. They've then had a trip to Wembley, which again is a nice touch, but they lost. So I think a B's fair. B plus is fair. They still probably would have taken that pre-season, but I mean, at the end of the day, like the drop off has been pretty wild. So I think that's about right. Um, Southampton, Reese.
F. I mean,
Yeah,
again, this could have gone into a U category. I knew they'd be poor, but I didn't think they'd be this bad. It's been a very, very bad season from the recruitment to with the style of play to the appointments of coaches. Yes, Russell Martin was already there, but it's not, yeah, yeah, what can you say? Two wins all season. Poor.
yeah.
So,
Embarrassing for them. People expected it, right? But to do that, yeah, to almost set a record-breaking low, you can't get any worse, really. Right, next up, Tottenham Hotspur. This was challenging to say the least because there is arguments for pretty much any letter here. Um, I guess you've got to look at the season overall and say at the start of the season, if you said Spurs were going to get Champions League football and win their first ever, well, not first ever trophy, but first trophy for a very long time, you have to put them in the A category. And I put it at A plus if you just ignore the league position. I mean, look, 17th is a complete and utter disgrace. And it is embarrassing. It is sack worthy. But the brief for Spurs, the brief for Ange is clear: win this club a trophy. So you have to judge it objectively and say that is one of their best ever seasons. It's ridiculous, but I think you have to put it as an A.
It's basically like the where United are is kind of where Spurs would be if they didn't win the final. It is sort of as simple as
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
It's I was talking to some Spurs fans when I was coming back from the Fulham game, and they're still not sure about Ange, and they know they've had a terrible performance of a season. But they've won Europa, so they're all sort of in a bit on in higher spirits kind of thing. So it's a difficult one, but I think yeah, you won your first trophy in 17 years. It has to be an A.
yeah.
Moving on to West Ham, I've gone with a D. I just think it's been such a underwhelming season for them. I don't think anything's actually gone right. I know they can probably be sort of happy they finished above Spurs. They'd have taken that at the start of the season. But other than that, I think Bowen is the only bit where you go sort of what's good about West Ham. The rest, I think it's been very poor, mediocre, and luckily there were a few teams who were worse off than them this season in the league. But yeah, nothing too great. That's why I put them in the D. I just think there was nothing positive to go off really.
Yeah, absolutely fair. They were in that category, right, of Man United and Spurs. Like you just look at the fixture list and you go, they're going to lose, and you just
I,
there's nothing about them.
I would say F for West Ham because I think if you'd have said, you should have offered them to finish above Spurs, they would have taken it. We would have assumed that that would have been in a top six, seven spot. I thought Lopetegui would improve the side. I thought they'd finish in the top 10.
Mm.
The transfers looked decent. They looked on course, but it was poor. And then I thought, okay, well, they sacked Lopetegui. So even though Lopetegui's record as a coach isn't great overall, and Potter is an upgrade, but there's not been a huge amount for us to get excited about. Again, they're one step forward, two steps back. It's been poor and a lot has to be done, but it's just not been great at all, is it? You know, it everyone would have thought West Ham would have done better.
Yeah, and they made good signings as well. That's what's wild. So it is a disappointment. Right, last but not least, it is Wolves over to me. I see Wolves as the same category as Everton, where they had a really really rough start, and you've got to remember Wolves were in the relegation conversation. Um, Gary O'Neill, I thought he was a good manager, but he just had an absolute mare. They lost players. They had issues with injuries, and the start of the season was just an absolute disaster. But Pereira's come in, steadied the ship, and in the end, they were very comfortable avoiding relegation. So I put it in a C bracket because I think it could have definitely been better, but it also could have been a lot worse. Um, So yeah, I think that's probably in line with Everton.
Yeah, I think looking around at sort of at the start of the season, I think a few people were looking at Wolves possibly going down. So to sort of comfortably survive is kind of a C season, really. But once again, I could even argue there's not tons of positives at Wolves because well, the owners are, I think, trying to mess everything up because there's even talk about their manager leaving. Cunha's going to United, so it could be a bit worrying times. Obviously, that's more for next season. But yeah, Wolves, I think C's fine. I think you could argue D, but they survived. It's not. I don't think it's an F season, so either seems fine with me.
Yeah, Reece, do you agree on Wolves?
Yeah, it was only getting worse. I think Pereira's been fantastic, and I think if they keep hold of him or he decides to stay, regardless, they've got to be looking out. Not huge investment is needed, judging by the performances they put in, right? Yeah, they're going to lose Cunha, but he's replaceable. I think Larsson's a very good player. Um, so yeah, it's just maybe bolster up the numbers a little bit if they can, but with the squad he's had at his disposal to achieve what he's done, no qualms about it. But I think they would like to have seen more of an improvement earlier on. So I think C is good, but with the financial constraints, etc., they've had, we can't be too shocked that they've ended up where they are.
Yeah. Right. Well, there you have it. That is the episode wrapped up, and there is our official grades for the 24-25 Prem season. Although the season is over, we are not taking a break. We will still have weekly podcasts and daily content on our Instagram and TikTok. So make sure you're following and you're subscribed. But as always, like, comment, and subscribe. You know the drill.